Hey Caitlin, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, thank you.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your role at the Missoula Food Bank?
Yeah, so I am the volunteer manager. We have about 15 staff members at the food bank, but we have about 400 volunteers a week and up to anywhere from 700 to 1,000 a month. So really, volunteers do all the real work at the food bank. So I just make sure we have enough people to do all the different things that we're doing. We have a lot going on. We have sometimes over 300 customers shopping in a day, so our volunteers facilitate the whole shopping process when people are coming to get emergency food. We distribute 1,000 Empower packs a week. We're doing big kids table snacks. We have a senior delivery service that distributes to about 650 seniors a month. So there's lots of projects that need lots of hands, and so the volunteers really make it all happen. So I help to recruit and find volunteers to support all of our programs, and make sure that they feel comfortable in their jobs as well. So I do lots of training. I do orientations and kind of on the job training, and a lot of my day is coordinating all of that with whether it's emails, phone calls, whatever it takes to make sure I have all the people here. But a lot of it's kind of on the job support too. Volunteers who have been around for many years still need support in many ways because we're busy. There's a lot going on. There's always questions and changes. So I work with my staff team to make sure that volunteers feel comfortable and feel confident in the work that they're doing too.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you kind of delved into this a little bit, but what does a typical day look like in the role of volunteer manager?
Yeah. There's not a typical day. We have the food bank at least has a pretty set schedule. That's the only way we're really able to operate is if we know when things are going to happen. We know we're going to have stockers in the morning. We know we're going to have people packing snacks in the afternoon or whatever it may be. That's all pretty set, and so I kind of go through the day based on shift changes, but everything else is super unpredictable. For example, just this morning we were super busy in our store. We're really busy at the end of the month, and so it was slammed, and we had one of our main volunteer interviewers call off, and so I ended up spending most of the morning interviewing when I didn't expect to do that. So it just changes kind of based on how many people we have for the day. We usually have a good idea of who's all going to be around to help, but things come up. It's a volunteer operated thing, so we're really flexible and we kind of just jump in as staff wherever there's gaps. So I would say my typical day looks like greeting lots of volunteers and making sure to check in, and then kind of navigating the rest of the day after I find out what things have inevitably come up. So it's a little different every day, but it's fun that way.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because you're so dependent on volunteer power to really make everything work, I would think that communication is really a key piece to making sure that people are where they need to be when they need to be there. So what do you do in terms of communication with volunteers?
So we try to be really good communicators all the time. When I first meet new volunteers, I do like a one-on-one meeting with each new volunteer, just to help them find the right fit, and I try to do a really good job at communicating what their position is going to entail so that they feel really good about it going in from the get-go. And also trying to communicate that we rely a lot on our volunteers, obviously, and so that it's really important that we keep good communication with each other. So volunteers let me know if they're going to be gone or have issues with the job that they're doing or whatever it may be. I try to keep that communication open, that I'm always looking for feedback, and anything volunteers want to tell me is really important to make sure I'm being a good communicator as well. We do lots of trainings throughout the year, update training type things, to try to get everyone on the same page and make sure we're understanding changes that are going on. So we try to communicate in that way. Also, just lots of on-the-job check-ins. Like, are you still liking this shift? Are you still happy with this? If you have to change your schedule, things like that. So I like to do as much in-person communication as possible. You know, with the number of volunteers we have, that can be hard because I don't see everyone all of the time. So email is definitely a big form of communication for me too. I do electronic newsletters as just another way to try to let as many people know as possible about things that are going on and things that I think are important to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Does your communication look different with different populations? So one of the things that we learned about earlier in the semester in this course is why people of different generations kind of volunteer or what they might need to be successful in their role. So do you alter your communication based on who you're communicating with?
Yeah, a little bit. More and more people are getting into the email world. But I remember, like, when I first started a few years ago, most of my work was just done over the phone. You know, we had a smaller operation then, and I would say majority of our volunteers were older and retired. And so phone was just the way, everything, to call subs in, to let people know about things. But and that still is true. There are certain folks who I know prefer, you know, talking over the phone or talking in person. So definitely, I would say older retired populations are usually the folks who I try to check in one of those ways. It does seem to be that as we've gotten more younger people volunteering, people who are students or just are in between jobs, have free time, email has been the way to go.
Do you text?
I do text, yeah. If people, whatever makes my job easier, honestly, if people prefer text rather than me calling them and then, you know, they never pick up or whatever it may be, I'm happy to text people. And I've also noticed a lot of the people I do text are some of the, like, baby boomer age too.
Interesting.
Yeah. So a little bit of everything depending on what people prefer. It's super important that our volunteers feel like they have a good way to communicate. So whatever way feels best for them, I will work with any of the ways.
Yeah. So it sounds like often frequent communication. Being flexible in how you communicate. Yep,
definitely. And there are times when our volunteers have to be a little bit flexible about how we communicate too. It could be someone I typically text, but something urgent came up, and so I feel like a phone call might be a little bit quicker or something like that. So our volunteers are really flexible in communication too, but really, yes, I try to be as flexible as possible, just so that everyone is feeling good about how we're reaching out to them.
You have a big job.
Yeah, it is big, but we couldn't do it without all of our volunteer help.
Right.
I have amazing and supportive volunteers that make my job a lot easier. Yeah.
Are there any lessons that you've learned the hard way in communicating with volunteers, like things that maybe you've tried that didn't work, or sometime that you offended someone accidentally, or?
Yeah. There's definitely things I've learned the hard way. I think one of the things for sure is assuming that everyone communicates in the same way. That is one of the things I've learned the hard way. When I first started, for example, using like the newsletter system, I assumed everyone would read my emails and everyone would see the electronic newsletter, but that's just not the case. And so we would, have important events in there, and attendance is low, and I'm like, oh darn, I could have done my part to make sure that people who don't read newsletters or whatever, emails, were still communicated to. So that's one thing, learning that people have different preferences for communication. Also trying to remember that every volunteer is here to help and thinks that and everyone has a different way of doing things, I guess.
Right.
So thinking that there is the right way to do any job is something I learned the hard way.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to better communicate that with volunteers too, that there's a
Yeah.
million different ways to do each thing, and
Right.
as long as it turns out, XYZ happens, it's
Right.
fine how you do it. So,
Yeah.
That's another lesson I've learned the
'Cause
hard way.
people want to do good work, and they want
Yeah.
to feel like their work is meaningful,
Right.
and not that they mess something up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. Mhm.
So, how do you think volunteer training helps with communication, or does it?
I think it does. I think thorough training definitely
Mhm.
helps with communication. As I've been around at the food bank for longer, I've questioned how I train volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
I've people who I have not taken as much time with in communicating all of the details of the job and all of the little random things that come with each job, have, I think, felt more confused off the bat
Mm-hmm.
and not supported enough. So I think thoughtful training, and taking the time with each person, at least in the beginning, is really important to making sure that we're communicating the real goals of each
Mhm.
job. So, and like I mentioned, we do update trainings throughout the year too, where we're checking in about things
Mhm.
that have happened, or things that are going to happen, changes, whatever. There's so much going on at our organization, at least. So having training opportunities, I think, feels like a really good form of communication for volunteers.
Mhm.
And just from the feedback I've gotten, people love having refreshers and check-ins, just to stay up to date and feel comfortable with their job.
Right.
Especially when, like I mentioned, so many different people are doing everything in a million different ways. As
Mhm.
much as we can get on the same page about the common goal, at least, I think is the best we can communicate to people.
Right.
Yeah.
I am curious, because you are reliant on so many volunteers.
Yeah.
How do you communicate in terms of recruitment and getting the word out about what you need and how to find those people?
Yeah, recruitment is hard. We've been really lucky at the food bank that up until pretty recently, we haven't had to do too much recruitment.
Mm-hmm.
We've just had a lot of interest, word of mouth.
Mhm.
It's a pretty positive organization, and it's pretty easy to see impact.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really appealing for a lot of volunteers, and so we've just kind of been able to always keep up with having enough folks. But until recently, as we've just gotten busier and expanded lots of different things, we've had to try recruiting. And I think word of mouth still really is something that has been super helpful.
Mhm.
So telling our current volunteers
Right.
what our needs are,
Mhm.
and sometimes that means those volunteers decide to do more, and
Mhm.
sometimes that means they tell their friends or tell people
Right.
they know who might be interested in volunteering. And I believe that that's been the most effective way.
Mhm.
But also using the electronic newsletter and social media as kind of an extra push.
Right.
I would say word of mouth is what we start with and see how far that gets us, because
Mhm.
it's people who are already kind of in our circle and
Right.
know our
Mhm.
what we're about and what we're trying to do. But when that doesn't work, we do have to resort to using Facebook posts or
Right.
sending out a mass email,
Mhm.
mass newsletter about what our needs are.
That's great.
Thanks.
And then, do you have one piece of advice for people who communicate with volunteers? They have like one thing they can take away from you. What would it be?
Yeah. I think being as flexible and compassionate as possible. It's important to remember that volunteers are donating their time, and though we are clear communicators about our need for volunteers and how much we rely on volunteers,
Mhm.
it's still super important to be so flexible and understanding when things happen and things change. People need to change schedules. People get sick and need to call off.
Right.
So being really compassionate and knowing that people are coming from a good place. They're wanting to donate
Mhm.
their time, but when those things pop up, we just figure it out. That would be my piece of advice, to be super flexible and don't ever think your day is going to go as planned.
That's great.
Changes a lot.
Yeah. Well, Caitlin, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure that everybody is going to learn a lot from this experience, and it is such an important topic.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.